Chapter 6. Hook had a terrible cold and a splitting headache. Once again, Peter Pan had managed to make a fool of him. "Curse that Peter Pan," Hook muttered to himself for the 100th time. It was something Smee had mentioned, almost casually, that lifted his spirits and convinced Hook that this time, finally, he would have Peter Pan. "Did you say Peter has banished Tinker Bell?" Hook asked. "Aye, Captain," Smee answered, "that he has." The news was incredible. Hook was taken aback. "But why?" he demanded. "Well," Smee explained, "on account of Wendy, Captain. Tink tried to do her in, she did." Hook could not believe his ears. "Tink is terrible jealous," Smee said. "Well, well," said the captain as he stroked his chin with his hook. A plan was beginning to take shape in his head. "That's it!" he cried suddenly. Smee smiled agreeably. "Smee," said Hook, with a delicious gleam in his eye, "get me my best dress coat." Smee went for the coat, and Hook refined his plan. If he could convince Tinker Bell that he wanted to help get rid of Wendy, she might just lead him to Peter Pan's hiding place. Smee returned with the captain's best coat and gold hook, then started to leave. "Where do you think you're going?" Smee shrugged uncertainly. Hook collared him. "You're going ashore to pick up Tinker Bell and bring her to me. Understand?" "Aye, aye, Captain," Smee saluted. Meanwhile, the chief had been so relieved by the safe return of Tiger Lily that he made Peter an honorary chief, Little Flying Eagle, and ordered a big celebration. Michael, John, and the Lost Boys were all freed and made honorary braves, too, and each was given a feather to wear. Peter let out a whoop, and everyone cheered. Soon they were all singing and dancing around the campfire, having a wonderful time. A large Indian woman with a papoose on her back stepped up to Wendy. "Stop dancing," she ordered. "Get firewood." Get firewood? But Wendy wanted to dance and shout like her brothers and Peter. The Indian woman pointed toward the woods. "Oh well," Wendy shrugged. She wished not to offend the Indians, and if collecting some firewood would make them happy, she'd do it. But when Wendy returned to camp with an armload of wood, she saw Tiger Lily dancing and shouting and having a wonderful time. What was worse, she was rubbing noses with Peter. Wendy fumed and threw down the wood. Just then, John, Michael, and the Lost Boys danced past her. Michael handed her his teddy bear. "Take the papoose," he commanded grandly. Wendy was shocked. Since when did she take orders from her baby brother? And to make matters worse, the Indian woman returned. "Get firewood," she ordered again. Wendy stomped her foot defiantly. "I won't get firewood," she corrected. "I'm going home." She marched out of the Indian camp and into the dark. Not far away, Tinker Bell listened sadly to the celebrating. She was heartbroken. First, Peter had brought that awful Wendy to Neverland, and now he was dancing with Tiger Lily. It wasn't fair, she told herself. Tinker Bell sighed. She didn't notice that Mr. Smee had sneaked up behind her. Smee quickly snatched Tinker Bell up in his cap. "Begging your pardon, Miss Bell," Smee chuckled as he twisted the cap shut, "but Captain Hook would like a word with you." A short time later, Tinker Bell found herself in Captain Hook's cabin aboard the pirate ship. Hook played piano and Smee drank wine from a keg, while Tinker Bell sat on a corked bottle and tried to ignore them both. "I admit defeat, Miss Bell," sighed Captain Hook ruefully. "Tomorrow I'll leave this island and never return. That's why I asked you over, my dear, to tell Peter I bear him no ill will." Tinker Bell gave Hook a suspicious look, turned her back to him, and crossed her arms. It was a look that seemed to suggest that she hardly cared whether Hook bore ill will or not. "Pan does have his faults," Hook continued. "For instance, bringing that Windy to the island." He gave Tinker Bell a quick, meaningful glance. "Rumor has it," he added significantly, "that she's already come between you and Peter." Tinker Bell sniffed. How she wished that awful Windy had never come to Neverland. Just the thought of her with Peter made Tinker Bell start to cry. "Think of it, Smee," Hook said with an elaborate show of fake sympathy. "A man takes the best years of a maid's life, and then casts her aside like an old glove." Tinker Bell nodded in agreement at the injustice of it all. That was exactly what Peter had done. Her tears turned to sobs. Even Smee's eyes were wet. "Ain't it a bloomin' shame?" Hook nodded sadly and graciously offered Tinker Bell a handkerchief. "Now we mustn't judge Peter too harshly. It's really Windy who's to blame." Tinker Bell dried her eyes. Hook was right, she told herself. Everything had been fine until Windy arrived. If only Peter hadn't gone back to the nursery for his shadow. "I've got it, Smee," said Hook suddenly. "We'll save the lad from himself." "But how?" Smee asked. "We sail in the morning." "That's it," Hook cried out, as if suddenly overtaken with a brilliant idea. "We'll kidnap Windy. Take her to sea with us. Once she's gone, Peter will forget this mad infatuation." He made for the door. "Come, Smee," Hook shouted. "We must leave immediately and surround Peter's home." "But, Captain," objected Smee, "we don't know where Peter Pan lives." Hook stopped in the doorway. "Great Scott!" he exclaimed, suddenly remembering. He looked back to Smee helplessly. "You're right." Tinker Bell eagerly flew to the map on the captain's table and jingled. "What?" asked Hook, feigning ignorance. "You could show us the way to Peter's hideout? Why, I never thought of that." He came back to the table and watched as Tinker Bell slowly outlined the route. He grew impatient at one point. "Get on with it," he snapped, then quickly caught himself. Tinker Bell flew up and jingled scoldingly. "Harm Peter?" Hook said innocently. "I give you my word never to lay a finger or hook on him." Satisfied, Tinker Bell revealed the location of Peter's hideaway on the map. "Hangman's Tree!" Hook cried with delight. He grabbed Tinker Bell and sneered. "Thank you, my dear. You've been most helpful." He thrust her into a lantern and locked its door. With a start, Tinker Bell realized what she'd done. She'd betrayed Peter. Hook had never wanted Windy. It was Peter he'd been after all along. She banged frantically against the glass, trying to escape. She had to warn Peter. Chapter 7. The boys danced all the way from the Indian camp to Hangman's Tree, and then slid down the secret entrance to the hideout. They danced past Wendy, who was sitting on the edge of her bed. She appeared thoroughly unamused. "Big Chief Flying Eagle greets his braves," Peter crowed as he made his triumphant entrance. The boys dropped to their knees and bowed. "Big Chief greets Little Mother," Peter told Wendy. "Ugh," said Wendy sourly as she turned away. "Aw, Wendy," Peter's voice was etched with disappointment. "Is that all you have to say? Everyone else thinks I'm wonderful." "Especially Tiger Lily," said Wendy sharply. "John, Michael," she said to the boys, "take off that war paint and get ready for bed." "Bed?" said John. "Braves don't sleep." Michael crossed his arms resolutely. "We go days without sleep." "But we're going home in the morning," said Wendy. "Home?" John gasped. "We don't want to go home," Michael complained. "Don't go home," Peter said in a commanding tone. "Wendy and the boys will stay and have a good time." Wendy felt her patience being tested. "Now, Peter," Wendy said, "let's stop pretending and be practical." But Peter had no interest in being practical. "Chief Flying Eagle has spoken," he said pompously. He crossed his arms and stalked into his own room. The boys broke out into a raucous cheer. "Oh, for goodness' sake, boys," Wendy tried to calm John and Michael down. "Do you want to stay here and grow up like Peter and the Lost Boys?" "Yes," Michael cried. "But you can't," insisted Wendy, buttoning up his pink pajamas. "You need a mother." "Aren't you our mother?" asked Michael. "Of course not," Wendy replied. "Surely you haven't forgotten our real mother." "Did she have silky ears and wear a fur coat?" Michael asked. "No, Michael, that was Nana," Wendy said. Across the room, the Lost Boys stopped playing and listened. "I think I had a mother once," Cubby said. What was she like?" asked one of the raccoon twins. "I forgot," Cubby admitted. "I had a white rat once," said Foxy. "That's no mother," Cubby said angrily. As usual, when the Lost Boys disagreed about something, a loud ruckus ensued. "Boys, boys!" cried Wendy impatiently. "Please stop. I'll tell you what a mother is." The Lost Boys stopped fighting and settled in a tight circle around Wendy. She sat down on the bed and took Michael onto her lap. "Well," Wendy began, "a mother is the most wonderful person in the world. She's the angel voice that bids you good night, kisses your cheeks, and whispers, 'Sleep tight.'" The boys listened raptly. Those who remembered their mothers now missed them dearly. Those who couldn't remember wished they could. They slowly wiped the war paint from their faces and pulled the feathers from their headbands. Michael put his arms around his big sister and sniffed. "I want to see my mother." "I propose we leave for home at once," John declared, grabbing his hat. "Could I go too?" Cubby asked. "Us too," said the other Lost Boys. They begged Wendy to take them with her. "All right, boys," she said. "I'm sure Mother would be glad to have you. That is, if Peter doesn't mind." Peter stuck his head out from behind the curtain to his room. "Go ahead," he said grumpily. "Go back and grow up. But I'm warning you," he added severely, "once you grow up, you can never come back. Never." He disappeared back into his room. The boys were surprised at the harshness of his words, but their thoughts soon turned again to having a mother. "Shall we be off, men?" called John, who was standing near the exit. The boys lined up and started out. Wendy paused as she passed by Peter's room. "Peter," she called hopefully. There was no answer. Wendy whispered a final sad farewell and left the treehouse. At the entrance to Hangman's Tree, Wendy gasped. Captain Hook and his band of pirates had captured the boys. A rough hand then came down over her mouth. "Take them away, men," Hook ordered. The pirates led the children back to the ship, and Hook and Smee gazed down into the secret entrance. "And now, Smee," said Hook, "we'll take care of Master Peter Pan." He lowered a box tied with a ribbon into Peter's lair. "Wouldn't it be more humane-like to slit his throat?" Smee asked. "Aye, it would," Hook sniggered. "But I gave my word not to lay a finger or a hook on Peter Pan. And Captain Hook never breaks a promise." Having left the mysterious box where Peter was sure to find it, Hook and Smee quickly made their way back to the ship. Chapter 8. On board the pirate ship, Wendy and the boys found themselves tied to the mast. At the far end of the deck, Hook sat at a table with his pirate log open before him. He dangled a quill pen over the book. "Sign on as a pirate today, and you'll get a free tattoo," he told the boys. "But I'll be frank, if you don't sign up, you'll walk the plank." Hook dipped the quill in a pot of ink. "Free the boys," he ordered. A pirate near the mast cut the rope. The boys ran, anxious to sign. "Boys," cried Wendy disapprovingly, "aren't you ashamed of yourselves?" The boys skidded to a halt. "But Captain Hook is most insistent," John tried to explain. "Yeah," said Cubby. "If we don't sign up, he said we'll walk the plank." "No, we won't." Wendy defiantly turned her nose up at Hook. "Peter Pan will save us." Hook and Smee laughed heartily. "1,000 pardons, my dear," Hook said once he'd caught his breath. "But I don't believe you're in on our little joke. You see, we left a present for Peter, a sort of surprise, you might say. Why, I can see our little friend at this very moment reading the tender inscription." "It says," Smee giggled, "To Peter, with love, from Wendy. Do not open until 6 o'clock." "If Peter could see within the package, he'd find an ingenious little device inside," Hook explained. "A bomb, set so that when the clock strikes 6, Peter will be blasted out of Neverland forever." "Oh, no," Wendy gasped. She wasn't the only one dismayed by the news. Trapped inside the lantern in Hook's cabin, Tinkerbell overheard Hook's plan and saw from the cabin clock that the appointed hour was only minutes away. She rocked the lantern back and forth until it tipped over and broke open. In a flash, Tinker Bell shot out the porthole and sped toward the island, leaving a trail of dust behind. In his hideout, Peter had found the mysterious box and was waiting impatiently for the clock on the wall to strike 6. He wondered what it could be. At 12 seconds to 6, his curiosity got the best of him, and he decided to open the box. But just as he was starting to undo the ribbon, Tinker Bell flew into the room, jingling frantically. "Hi, Tink!" Peter showed her the box. "Look what Wendy left!" Tinker Bell instantly tried to pull the box away. "Hey, stop it!" Peter pulled the box back. "What's the matter with you?" Tinker Bell jingled as fast as she could. "A bomb?" said Peter skeptically. "Don't be ridiculous." Inside the box, the clock attached to the bomb struck 6. As the alarm began to ring, Tinker Bell dove toward Peter and whisked the box away. From the deck of the pirate ship, Wendy cried out as an enormous explosion rocked the island. The ship reeled sideways, and pieces of trees and rocks were hurled hundreds of yards into the air. Hook ceremoniously removed his hat and held it over his heart. "And so passeth a worthy opponent," he said solemnly. Little did Hook suspect that Peter was still alive. Thanks to Tinker Bell, he had been spared the full effect of the blast. Desperately, he crawled out from under the rubble of rock and boulder that had once been his hideout. "Tink!" Peter called out. "Tinker Bell!" A faint tinkling sound came from somewhere under the rubble. "Where are you?" Peter cried, digging frantically through the debris. "Are you all right?" Tinker Bell jingled weakly. She was trying to tell him about Wendy and the boys aboard the pirate ship. "But I have to save you first." Peter clawed through the broken timbers. Loose debris showered down around him, nearly burying him. But he ducked out of the way and kept digging ahead through the broken tree limbs and past the overturned rocks. He could see Tinker Bell's faint glow. "Hold on, Tink! Hold on!" But Tinker Bell's glow was fading. "Don't go out!" Peter cried. "Don't you understand? You mean more to me than anything in the whole world." The glow from Tinker Bell flared momentarily, then faded. Just as Peter reached her, a huge boulder gave way, and a torrent of rocks and wood crashed down, leaving nothing but dust and silence. Chapter 9. Aboard the pirate ship, Hook once again offered Wendy and the boys a choice. "Which will it be? The pen or the plank?" "We will never join your crew," Wendy stated bravely. "As you wish," replied Hook with a malicious grin. He pointed to the plank. "Ladies first, my dear." Even at the end, Wendy remained stoic. She turned to the Lost Boys and said goodbye, then patted John on the head. "Be brave, John." "I shall strive to, Wendy." John stood tall and puffed out his chest, but he was very sad. Michael wiped a tear from his eye, and Wendy gave him a farewell kiss on the cheek. But before she could tell him how much she loved him, she was grabbed by a large pirate. "Go on with ye," he growled. Once again, the boys were tied to the mast, where they watched in dismay as the pirates pushed Wendy toward the plank. Wendy held her head high as she walked slowly onto the plank and out over the placid waters. On deck behind her, The bloodthirsty pirates shouted impatiently. "Oh, Peter," Wendy thought, gazing up at the cloudy gray sky. "If only you were here." She reached the end of the plank and hesitated. A tear rolled off her cheek and dropped into the salty water below. There was no turning back, Wendy told herself. She stepped off the plank and promptly disappeared. On deck, Hook and others listened for the splash. They waited and waited. "Captain," Smee gasped, "no splash!" Mr. Smee was right. Wendy had made no splash, not a sound. Hook and the others rushed to the railing and peered down into the still water. "Not a bloomin' ripple," one of the pirates whispered. "It's a jinx." "The ship's bewitched," another pirate cried. Hook spun around and caught him by the shirt. "So you want a splash? I'll give you a splash." He angrily threw the offending pirate over the side, then turned to the rest of the crew. "Who's next?" he demanded. "You're next, Hook," a voice shouted from above. Startled, Hook looked up. Peter Pan and Wendy were in the crow's nest, and Tinker Bell, too. She was alive. "This time you've gone too far, Hook," Peter shook his fist. "It's Pan and Wendy," the boys cried. "It can't be." Hook was dumbfounded. "It's his ghost," Smee cried. "Say your prayers, Hook." Peter drew his dagger and dove down toward the deck. "I'll show you this ghost has blood in his veins," Hook shouted as he drew his long sword. A moment later, Peter landed on the deck, and a ferocious duel ensued. Peter and Hook fought back and forth across the deck and around the mast. Hook at last lunged and took a mighty swing at Peter, and missed, burying his hook deep in the mast. "Curse it!" the captain snarled. While Hook tried to free himself from the wood, Peter cut the rope away from the boys. "Come on, everybody!" he yelled. The boys started to climb the ship's rigging toward the crow's nest. "Don't just stand there!" Hook screamed at his men. "Get those scurvy brats!" Pirates with daggers clenched in their teeth scrambled after the boys up the rigging. In the crow's nest, armed with rocks, sticks, and slingshots, the boys nervously readied themselves. "Steady, men! Hold your fire!" John warned them cautiously. The pirates climbed higher. "Steady!" John's voice wavered. Just as the lead pirate reached the crow's nest, John yelled, "Fire!" The boys unleashed a barrage. One after another, the pirates were beaten back until only the largest, most bloodthirsty pirate remained, clinging to the bottom of the crow's nest, swinging his shining broad cutlass. "Down, you blackguard!" John whacked him repeatedly on the head with his umbrella. Meanwhile, the other pirates had started up the rigging again. Tinker Bell saw that the boys were in trouble and raced down to tell Peter, who was still locked in a duel with Hook. Peter deftly ducked under Hook's sword, then kicked him in the chin so hard that Hook tumbled backward and crashed into one of the ship's cannons. Peter flew up to the crow's nest. With a swish of his dagger, he cut the rigging and sent the pirates crashing down into a small dinghy Smee had launched in an attempt to escape. Hook finally regained his senses and cursed his men for abandoning ship. He was the only pirate left. Peter alighted on a yardarm. Hook looked up and shook his fist. "Fly! Fly, you coward!" "Coward!" answered Peter. "Me?" "You wouldn't dare fight old Hook man to man," Captain Hook shouted as he climbed the rigging. "You'd fly away like a cowardly sparrow." "Nobody calls me a coward and lives," Peter shouted back. "I'll fight you man to man with one hand tied behind my back." Hook pulled himself up onto the yardarm, high above the ship's deck. He swung his sword forward, locking it against Peter's dagger. "You won't fly?" he dared Peter. "Don't do it, Peter," Wendy cried from the crow's nest. "It's a trick." But Peter wouldn't listen. "I give my word, Hook." "Then let's have at it," Hook cried. Before Peter knew what had happened, the pirate captain pushed him off the yardarm. Wendy and the boys gasped as Peter grabbed frantically for a rope to keep from plunging into the sea. Hook's longsword slashed through the air, but Peter managed to pull himself back onto the yardarm. The duel continued across the spar. Several times Peter almost lost his balance as he tried to avoid Hook's blade. Suddenly, Hook batted the dagger out of Peter's hand. The pirate captain caught the knife and hurled it into the water below. "Insolent youth!" the pirate captain snickered. "Prepare to die!" "Fly!" Wendy cried from the crow's nest. "Please, Peter, fly!" "No!" Peter shouted. "I gave my word." As Hook pressed the sword forward, Peter inched back toward the end of the yardarm. His heart beat like a drum, and his throat felt tight and dry. As he looked around, he knew his choices were dismal. Either fall into the sea and drown, or be skewered by Hook's sword. Hook drew back his sword for one final thrust. At the last second, Peter noticed the black pirate flag fluttering over Hook's head. Catching Hook by surprise, he leapt up and pulled it down over the pirate captain's head. While Hook suddenly found himself tangled in the flag, Peter grabbed the sword away. "You're mine, Hook," said Peter. Peter held the sword on the pirate captain, still tangled in the flag. Hook stared out in disbelief. While the boys shouted from the crow's nest, "Off with his head! Give him one, Peter! Cleave him to the brisket!" "You wouldn't do old Hook in, now would you, lad?" Hook begged as Peter kept the sword trained on him. "I'll go away forever. I'll do anything you say." Peter considered the pirate's proposal. What was the worst, most despicable thing he could force Hook to do? Suddenly, he knew. "All right," he said. "Say you're a codfish." Hook swallowed and looked aghast. "Say it," Peter prodded him with the sword. I'm a codfish," Hook whimpered. "Louder," Peter insisted. "I'm a codfish," Hook cried in disgrace. From the crow's nest came a cheer as the boys chanted, "Hook is a codfish, Hook is a codfish." "All right, Hook," Peter said, lowering the sword. "You're free to go. But you must never return." Hook nodded meekly. Peter threw the sword into the sea and crowed in triumph. Look out, Peter! Wendy cried. The pirate swung his hook at Peter, but Peter ducked just in the nick of time. Hook lost his balance and began to teeter off the yardarm. A moment later, he fell off the spar and plunged downward toward the sea and into the waiting jaws of the crocodile. The pirate captain disappeared down the great reptile's gullet. Was this finally the end of Hook? Peter and the others watched in amazement. Suddenly, Hook burst out of the crocodile's mouth. He cried out for Smee and swam as fast as he could, zigzagging away into the sunset with the hungry crocodile nipping at his toes. Chapter 10. Wendy and the boys cheered. "Hooray! Hooray for Captain Pan!" Peter pulled on Hook's coat and hat and playfully strutted across the poop deck. "All right, you swabs! Aloft with the sails! We're casting off! Heave those halyards!" Wendy looked at Peter and curtsied. "But Peter, that is, Captain Pan." "At your service, madam." Peter bowed gallantly. "Could you tell me, sir, where we're sailing?" Peter smiled and took the wheel. "To London, of course." Wendy clasped her hands with delight, her heart filled with joy. "Oh, Peter!" she cried happily, then turned to her brothers. "Michael, John, we're going home." "Man the capstan!" Peter shouted as they prepared to sail. "Hoist anchor! Pixie dust!" Tinker Bell danced up into the air and sprinkled down pixie dust in a tinkling rain. Soon the entire ship had a golden glow, and it lifted off into the clouds under a full moon. Wendy hugged her brothers. Behind them, Neverland grew smaller and smaller until it was just a memory. In London, George and Mary Darling returned home from their party. George untied Nana and let the dog join them as they climbed the stairs to the nursery. "I'm so glad you changed your mind about Wendy," Mary said as they climbed the stairs. "After all, she's still a child." "Now, Mary, you know I never mean those things," George replied. They reached the top of the stairs, and Mary pushed open the nursery door. The room was dark and quiet, but she was startled to find Wendy's bed empty. "Wendy?" she gasped. Nana ran to the open window. Mary followed her and found Wendy sleeping on the window seat. "Wendy, what on earth are you doing there?" Wendy rubbed her sleepy eyes. When she saw her mother, she jumped up and ran into her arms. "Oh, Mother, we're back!" "Back?" asked her father. "All except the Lost Boys," Wendy explained. "They weren't quite ready to grow up. That's why they went back to Neverland." "Neverland?" George repeated. "But I am," Wendy said. "You're what?" asked her father. "I'm ready to grow up," Wendy said proudly. "Oh," he said. Wendy hurried up to her mother, who was tucking the boys into their beds. "Oh, Mother," said Wendy breathlessly, "it was such a wonderful adventure. Tinker Bell and the mermaids and Peter Pan. He was the most wonderful of all. Why, even when we were kidnapped, I knew—" "Kidnapped?" George repeated with a gasp. "Yes," Wendy nodded emphatically. "I knew Peter would save us, and he did. And we all called Captain Hook a codfish, and then we sailed away on a ship into the sky." "Mary," said George with a huge yawn, "I'm going to bed." He turned to leave the nursery. Wendy returned to the window seat and gazed up at the sky. "Oh, Mother," she said dreamily, "he really is wonderful, isn't he? See how well he sails the ship." Mary smiled wistfully. She was just about to guide Wendy back to her bed when she looked up in the sky. "George!" Mary shouted. "George!" "Now what, Mary?" George asked irritably as he stopped at the doorway. But as he turned and looked back out the window, he suddenly caught his breath. Up in the sky, passing right in front of the full moon, was the most remarkable cloud he'd ever seen. It was shaped almost exactly like a sailing ship. George stepped closer to the window and felt goosebumps run up and down his arms. "My word," he said with astonishment. "I have the strangest feeling that I've seen that ship before, a long time ago, when I was very young." "Oh, dear George," Mary whispered happily. Wendy smiled, and together they watched the ship as it sailed past the moon on its journey home to Neverland. The end.